I want to start with a number that should be impossible 9 months. That is how long American buyers are currently waiting for a brand new Ford F 150, the best selling vehicle in the United States for the past 47 consecutive years. Not a luxury car, not a limited edition. The F 150, the truck that has defined American automotive culture for half a century, the vehicle that construction workers, farmers, and small business owners depend on to do their jobs. 9 months from order to delivery. And if you ask forward why, if you dig past the corporate speak about supply chain optimization and production adjustments, you discover something that should shake every American who cares about manufacturing, about jobs, about the future of this country. The reason you are waiting 9 months for an American truck is that it is no longer being built in America. It is being built in Canada. And not just a small portion of it. 80% of F 150 production has quietly systematically relocated to Oakville, Ontario, a mid sized city just outside Toronto that most Americans have never heard of. Meanwhile, the River Rouge complex in Dearborn, Michigan, the legendary facility that Henry Ford himself built in 1917, the plant that once employed 100,000 workers and symbolized American industrial might, is shutting down. 9,000 workers are losing their jobs, in the city of Detroit, which has already suffered through decades of decline, is confronting a future where its very identity, the Motor City, no longer reflects reality. What officially happened is straightforward enough, at least on paper. Ford announced it would be restructuring its North American operations to improve efficiency and reduce costs. The company emphasized that it remained committed to American manufacturing and that some production would continue in the United States. It used all the familiar language about competitiveness and global markets. But if you stopped there, you would miss the most consequential industrial collapse since the steel mills closed in the 1980s. You would miss why one of the most iconic American companies, founded in Detroit, built on Detroit labor, intertwined with Detroit's history for more than a century, decided that it could no longer afford to manufacture its flagship product on American soil. And you would miss how a trade war designed to protect American workers ended up destroying their jobs faster than any foreign competition ever could. Let me be clear about what set this in motion. Trump imposed a 25% tariff on automotive parts coming from Canada and Mexico. The stated goal was to force companies to bring manufacturing back to the United States to create jobs to rebuild the industrial base. But there was a fundamental problem with this strategy, a problem so obvious that anyone with even a basic understanding of how cars are made should have seen it coming. Modern vehicles are not built in one place. They are assembled from components manufactured in dozens of locations across multiple countries. A single car contains roughly 30,000 individual parts. For American automakers, approximately 60% of those parts come from suppliers in Canada and Mexico. Engine blocks, transmissions, electrical systems, suspension components, computer modules, all of it crosses borders multiple times during the manufacturing process. A transmission might be cast in Mexico, machined in Michigan, fitted with electronics in Ontario, and then shipped back to an assembly plant in Kentucky. This is not inefficiency, it is specialization. Each facility focuses on what it does best, and the entire system works because the borders are or were essentially invisible for trade purposes. Trump's tariff shattered that system overnight. Suddenly, every time a component crossed a border, it became 25% more expensive. Ford's costs exploded. A truck that used to cost $12,000 in parts to build was now costing $15,000. And here is the critical part. There was no way to replace those parts with American-made alternatives. The factories did not exist. The expertise did not exist. The supply chains did not exist. Building that infrastructure from scratch would take a decade and hundreds of billions of dollars in investment. So Ford had three options: absorb the cost and watch profits disappear, pass the cost to consumers and watch sales collapse, or find a way to avoid the tariffs entirely. They chose option three, and Mark Carney was ready. Carney understood something that Trump either did not understand or did not care about. If you make it expensive to build cars in the United States by taxing the components required to build them, Companies will not magically start sourcing everything domestically. They will move production to where the components already are. And in the case of automotive manufacturing, a huge portion of those components are in Canada. Southern Ontario specifically has been a hub for auto parts manufacturing for decades. Hundreds of suppliers, thousands of skilled workers, infrastructure designed specifically for this industry. What it did not have was final assembly capacity on the scale needed to replace American plants. But Carney fixed that. He announced a plan so ambitious that even skeptics had to admit it was bold. Ontario would become home to the most integrated automotive manufacturing corridor in the world. Not just assembly plants, everything, engine factories, stamping facilities, parts suppliers, logistics hubs, even the steel mills and aluminum smelters that provided raw materials. The entire supply chain from iron ore to finished vehicle within a 50-kilometer radius, no tariffs, no border delays, no political uncertainty, just a seamless, efficient system designed to do one thing: build cars. And here is what Carney put on the table to make it happen. The provincial government would provide the land already zoned and permitted for industrial use. The federal government would cover 50% of infrastructure costs, roads, rail lines, power substations, tax incentives worth billions locked in for 15 years, regardless of which party controlled government. Guaranteed access to cheap hydroelectric power, fast-tracked environmental approvals, partnerships with technical colleges to train workers in the specific skills automakers needed, and perhaps most importantly, a promise. Canada would not weaponize trade policy. The rules would be clear, consistent, and predictable. Ford's leadership ran the numbers. Building the F-150 in Oakville, even accounting for the distance from American markets, was cheaper and more reliable than trying to navigate Trump's tariff chaos. The decision was not even close. Within 6 months, construction began on what would become the largest automotive complex in North America. Within 18 months, the first trucks rolled off the line. And within 2 years, 80% of F-150 production had shifted north. Now, if you live in Detroit or anywhere in the industrial Midwest, you are living through the consequences of that decision right now. Let me show you what this looks like on the ground because the statistics cannot capture the human cost. Meet Marcus. He is 48 years old, a third-generation Ford worker. His grandfather started at River Rouge in 1952, right after coming back from Korea. His father spent 42 years on the assembly line before retiring with a pension that allowed him to buy a small house in Dearborn and live with dignity. Marcus started at the plant in 2002, right out of high school. For 22 years, he installed engines into F-150 chassis. It was hard work, physically demanding, repetitive, but it paid $68,000 a year with full benefits over time when he wanted it and the kind of job security that let him plan a future. He got married, bought a house 3 blocks from where he grew up, had 2 kids, coached Little League. His life was not glamorous, but it was stable. It was enough. 8 months ago, Marcus got called into a meeting with his shift supervisor. The plant was scaling back F-150 production. They needed to reduce headcount by 40%. Seniority would determine who stayed. Marcus, despite 22 years, was not senior enough. The plant still employed people who had been there since the 1980s. He was offered a transfer to a facility in Tennessee, assembling a different vehicle at lower pay. No guarantee his family could come. No help with relocation costs, or he could take a buyout. 18 months of severance. He took the buyout. What else could he do? For the first 2 months, Marcus told himself he would find something else. Detroit has other manufacturers. There are warehouses, logistics companies, construction firms. He applied everywhere. But here's the problem. When the largest employer in a region sheds thousands of workers all at once, the entire local economy contracts. Everyone is looking for the same jobs. Wages plummet because employers know they can pay less. Marcus got 3 interviews. One offered $14 an hour. One was part-time with no benefits. One never called him back. His savings ran out after 4 months. He stopped paying the mortgage after 6. The bank started foreclosure proceedings 2 weeks ago. His wife works at a grocery store 30 hours a week, barely enough to cover utilities and food. Their oldest daughter had to drop out of community college because they could not afford tuition. Marcus is thinking about moving to Tennessee. taking that transfer job if it is still available, even though it means leaving his wife behind until they can sell the house, which they probably cannot sell because property values in Dearborn have collapsed as the plant shuts down. This is not a story about one man. This is the story of 9,000 families, 9,000 mortgages, 9,000 lives built around the assumption that if you worked hard, showed up, did your job, the system would hold up its end of the bargain. And that assumption just evaporated. Now, let me show you the other side. Meet Priya. She is 35 years old, an immigrant from India who moved to Canada 6 years ago. She has a degree in mechanical engineering and spent 3 years working for a small parts supplier in Beampton, just outside Toronto. When Ford announced the Oakville expansion, her company won a contract to supply suspension components. They doubled their workforce. Priya was promoted to production manager. Her salary went from $62,000 Canadian to $85,000. That is about $63,000, a bit less than Marcus was making. But Priya does not pay for health insurance. Her two kids go to public school that is actually well funded. Her commute is 20 minutes on a commuter train the government subsidized. She bought a townhouse last year. And even though Toronto's housing market is expensive, she qualified for a mortgage because her job is stable. Her income is predictable, and banks are not worried about the auto industry collapsing. Priya's company is hiring. They need quality control specialists, machine operators, logistics coordinators. The pay starts at $28 Canadian an hour, about $21 with benefits, paid vacation, and a pension plan. The local technical college is running a training program specifically designed to feed workers into the automotive sector. Students graduate with job offers already lined up. The town is building new apartment complexes to house the influx of workers. A new grocery store just opened, 3 new restaurants, a child care center. This is what economic momentum looks like when it is building, not collapsing. And here is the part that should infuriate you. Priya is not doing anything Marcus was not capable of doing. She is not working harder. She is not smarter. She did not make better choices. She just had the fortune of living in a place where the government made different decisions that prioritized building an industrial base instead of dismantling it with reckless trade policy. The structural consequences of this shift go far beyond individual stories. Consider what happens when automotive production leaves a region. First, you lose the direct jobs, the assembly line workers, the engineers, the quality inspectors. Then you lose the supplier jobs, the companies that make seats, dashboards, tires, glass. They either relocate to stay near the assembly plants or they shut down entirely. Then you lose the service jobs, the restaurants where workers ate lunch, the gas stations where they filled up, the stores where they shopped, the gyms where they worked out. All of it was sustained by the paychecks generated by the plant. When those paychecks disappear, everything else collapses in sequence. Detroit is experiencing this collapse in real time. Property values are plummeting. Schools are losing funding as tax revenues drop. The city is cutting services, closing libraries, reducing police and fire coverage because it cannot afford to operate on a smaller tax base. Young people are leaving. Anyone with the mobility to go somewhere else is going. The population is aging, shrinking, becoming poorer, and once that spiral starts, it is almost impossible to reverse. Meanwhile, the corridor between Toronto and Windsor, the stretch of Ontario highway that connects the major automotive plants, is booming. They are calling it Auto Valley, a deliberate echo of Silicon Valley. Kitchener, Waterloo, GE, Cambridge, Oshawa, towns that were once quiet, modest, industrial, but unremarkable, are now the epicenter of North American automotive production. High-rise apartment buildings are going up. Property values are surging. Local governments are flushed with tax revenue and investing in infrastructure, transit, parks, schools. The University of Waterloo is expanding its engineering program to meet demand from automakers. Students are turning down offers from American universities to stay close to where the jobs are. And it is not just Ford. General Motors quietly shifted a massive portion of its truck production to a facility in Oshawa that was supposed to have closed 5 years ago. Stellantis, the parent company of Chrysler, Jeep, and Ram, is building a new plant in Windsor specifically to manufacture electric vehicle components. The entire industry is reorganizing itself around the assumption that Canada is more stable, more predictable, and more business friendly than the United States. Let that sink in. Canada, a country with a smaller population, a smaller economy, and a shorter industrial history, is now seen as the safer bet for long term investment. The political dimension of this disaster is worth examining because it reveals the staggering gap between rhetoric and reality. Trump sold the tariffs as a way to bring back American jobs. He promised that companies would have no choice but to build in America if he made it expensive enough to build elsewhere. But he fundamentally misunderstood how modern manufacturing works. You cannot bully companies into investing billions of dollars in infrastructure when the policy environment is chaotic and unpredictable. Businesses need to know that the rules will not change arbitrarily every 2 years based on whoever wins an election or whatever the president tweets at 3 in the morning. Canada offers that stability. The United States under Trump does not. Carney understood this. He understood that Ford was not making a decision based on patriotism or loyalty. It was making a decision based on costs, risks, and long term viability. And he structured his offer to address all three: lower costs by eliminating tariffs and providing subsidies, lower risk by guaranteeing policy consistency, increase viability by building an entire ecosystem that made Canada the logical place to manufacture vehicles. The result is that Trump's tariffs, which were supposed to protect American workers, have destroyed more manufacturing jobs than any trade deal in history. The irony is almost too painful to acknowledge. A policy designed to punish foreign competitors ended up punishing American workers, and the workers, people like Marcus, had no say in any of it. They did not vote for the tariffs. They did not design the policy. They just showed up to work one day and discovered their jobs were gone. Now, let's talk about what this means for you. Even if you do not work in the auto industry, even if you have never set foot in Detroit, because the consequences of this collapse ripple outward in ways that touch every part of the economy. First, vehicle prices. When production moves and supply tightens, prices rise. The average price of a new F-150 has increased by $11,000 in the past 2 years. Some of that is inflation, some of it is new technology, but a significant portion is the result of production bottlenecks caused by the relocation. Ford is still ramping up capacity in Canada. In the meantime, demand far exceeds supply. Dealers are adding markups, sometimes as high as $15,000 over sticker price because they know customers will pay it. If you need a truck for your business, if your old one dies and you cannot wait 9 months, you pay the markup. You do not have a choice. Second, the used car market. When new cars become unaffordable or unavailable, people hold on to their old cars longer. That drives up prices for used vehicles. A 5-year-old F-150 that would have sold for $25,000 2 years ago now sells for $38,000. That is not a market working efficiently. That is a market distorted by policy failure. Third, the broader economy. Manufacturing jobs are not just jobs, they are anchors for entire communities. When a plant closes, it does not just hurt the workers who lose their paychecks, it hurts the small business owner who loses customers, it hurts the school district that loses tax revenue, it hurts the family trying to sell their house in a market where no one is buying. Economic pain spreads like a contagion, and once it takes hold, it is very hard to stop. The consequences for American soft power are also significant, though less visible. For decades, American automotive dominance was a symbol of American industrial strength. The cars we built, the brands we created, the innovations we pioneered, all of it reinforced the narrative that America was the most advanced, most capable, most dynamic economy in the world. But when the F-150, the most American vehicle imaginable, is being built in Canada because American policy made it impossible to build profitably in America, that narrative collapses. Other countries notice, investors notice, and they start asking questions about whether the United States is still the safest place to put their money. China is watching this very carefully. For years, Chinese automakers have been trying to break into the North American market. They have been blocked by tariffs, safety regulations, and consumer preferences for established brands. But if American companies are struggling, if production is chaotic, if delivery times are measured in months instead of weeks, Chinese manufacturers see an opportunity. They are already partnering with Canadian firms, exploring joint ventures that would allow them to build vehicles in Canada and ship them tariff-free into the United States under existing trade agreements. 10 years from now, you might be buying a Chinese branded truck built in Ontario because Ford could not keep up with demand. That is not speculation. That is the logical progression of current trends. The environmental implications are also worth considering, though they cut in complicated directions. On the one hand, relocating production to Canada, where the electrical grid runs primarily on hydroelectric and nuclear power, reduces the carbon footprint of manufacturing. Ontario's grid is one of the cleanest in the world. Building a truck there generates significantly fewer emissions than building it in Michigan, where coal still provides a substantial portion of electricity. On the other hand, shipping finished vehicles longer distances increases transportation emissions. The net effect is unclear, but it highlights how trade policy and environmental policy intersect in ways most people never think about. What makes this entire situation even more tragic is that it was avoidable. Every step of the way, there were off-ramps, opportunities to recognize that the policy was failing and course correct. But those opportunities were ignored because admitting failure would have required admitting that the entire premise of the trade war was flawed. And political leaders, especially Trump, do not admit failure. They double down. They blame someone else. They insist that the pain is temporary, that the strategy is working, that any day now the jobs will come flooding back. But the jobs are not coming back. The factories are not reopening. And the workers who believed the promises, who trusted that their government would protect their livelihoods, are left with nothing but broken communities and empty assurances. Let's return to Marcus for a moment because his story does not end with a buyout. 3 weeks ago, he got a call from a recruiter. There was an opening at the Oakville plant. Same job he used to do installing engines. The pay was $72,000 Canadian, about $54,000 US. A bit less than he was making before, but still decent, full benefits. The recruiter said Ford was prioritizing experienced workers, people who knew the systems, who could train the new hires. Marcus asked about relocation assistance. The recruiter said Ford would cover moving costs and help with work permits. It sounded almost too good to be true. Marcus's wife cannot leave. Her mother is sick, needs daily care, lives 10 minutes away. His youngest daughter is a junior in high school, finally settled after a rough couple of years, doing well, has friends. Uprooting her now would be devastating. And even if he went alone, even if he took the job and sent money back, Canadian work permits for Americans are not automatic. The process can take months. He would need a lawyer, which costs money he does not have, and there is no guarantee it would be approved. So Marcus is stuck. Too young to retire, too old to start over in a new field, too rooted to move, too broke to stay. This is the reality for thousands of workers across the Midwest. The jobs still exist, they just exist somewhere else, somewhere most of them cannot reach. Meanwhile, Priya just got another promotion. She is now overseeing quality control for 3 different suppliers. Her salary is up to $95,000 Canadian. She is thinking about buying a bigger house, maybe something with a yard for the kids. Her company is sending her to Germany next month for a training program on electric vehicle manufacturing. They are investing in her because they see a future. They see growth. They see stability. The contrast could not be sharper. 2 workers, similar skills, similar work ethic, similar jobs. One is facing foreclosure and the collapse of everything he built. The other is thriving, advancing, building wealth. The difference is not talent, it is geography, it is policy, it is leadership. And that brings us to the fundamental question this entire disaster forces us to confront. What does it mean to be a manufacturing superpower when you have made it economically irrational to manufacture inside your own borders? For a century, the United States dominated global manufacturing because it had the infrastructure, the workers, the innovation, and the political stability to make long-term investments safe. Companies built here because it made sense. Factories stayed here because the system worked. But Trump's trade war has shattered that foundation. It has introduced volatility, unpredictability, and risk into what was once the most stable business environment in the world. And once you introduce that uncertainty, capital flees. It does not matter how patriotic a CEO claims to be. If the numbers do not work, the factory moves. Canada is not better than the United States in some abstract moral sense. It is not more innovative, it is not richer, it is not larger, but right now, in this moment, it is more predictable. And in the world of billion-dollar manufacturing investments, predictability is everything. The workers who are paying the price for this policy failure deserve better. They deserve leaders who understand that economic security is not built on slogans and tariffs. It is built on smart industrial policy, on investments in infrastructure, on education systems that prepare people for the jobs of the future, on trade agreements that are fair but not self-destructive. It is built on recognizing that we live in a globalized economy, and pretending we do not will not change that reality. It will just make us poorer. Detroit is not dead, but it is dying.